Public transit in Canada is in crisis. Between chronic underfunding, decreasing ridership, and really outdated and crumbling, I would say, infrastructure, it's becoming increasingly difficult for urban residents to rely on transit, while rural areas often have no options at all. Could making public transit free be a climate solution that also addresses social inequities?
Hello and welcome to Pullback, where we ask experts to explain big ideas so you get the full story behind the hype. Pullback is a proud member of the Harbinger Media Network of progressive Canadian podcasts. I'm Kyla Hewson, and I'm here with my co-host, Kristen Pugh.
On today's episode, we spoke with Rubens and Christian, who are organizers with Climate Justice Montreal, which is a group that's pursuing environmental and climate justice through education, mobilization, and collective action in solidarity with directly affected communities.
In this conversation, Rubens and Christian make the case for why public transit shouldn't just be affordable, it should be free for all. Free transit reduces carbon emissions, eases traffic congestion, and improves noise and air pollution. It removes financial barriers, helping low-income riders, students, and seniors get where they need to go. This episode explores how a fare free system isn't just a dream, it's a practical step toward more just and sustainable cities. Let's get started.
Why is public transportation important for a just transition away from fossil fuels?
I'll just start us off by saying that, in Quebec, 40% of greenhouse gas emissions are from transportation. And then nationally, it's 23%. And then 70% of that 23% is passengers in cars and trucks. Cars do account for a lot of our greenhouse gas emissions. So looking at transportation in general, when we're thinking about a just transition off of fossil fuels, is really, really important. And public transportation, in that overall, those greenhouse gas emissions from transit are not accounting for nearly as much. So public transit is a climate solution.
We advocate more for transit because probably both of you know, the mainstream solution is to have more electric vehicles, replace every gas vehicle with electric one. And we don't think that's the best solution. We don't need to support the billionaires like Elon Musk. And a lot of what we do is try to expose people to more unconventional ideas, and focusing on transit is something you don't really hear that often. So there's a lot of stuff interconnected with that, and it intersects with a lot of issues. And transportation is a key component to a just transition off of fossil fuels more than, let's say, keeping car culture.
A lot of government climate plans so far have focused on providing rebates for electric vehicles. And as you've alluded to, that is not the approach that might be the best one. So I guess, can you talk about what some of the problems are with focusing on zero emission vehicles?
The whole point is that we don't want to perpetuate the current system as it is now. It mostly benefits car producers, car manufacturers that kind of got us in this predicament in the first place. It also kind of changes the extractivist nature of things. So before, we're extracting oil with electric vehicles to make the batteries. We're extracting more metals lithium and cobalt. And usually that's done in other countries where the working condition and exploitation is pretty bad. And we don't want to continue the cycle of exploitation. That's why focusing more on transit instead of individualized vehicles is a better solution. Also, designing cities around public transportation instead of individual vehicles has societal impacts where there's more of a community vibe. Moving around with people, it gives you a bigger sense of community. So those are a few points as to why transit is better than individual vehicles.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add there is that, like Ruben said, we're not disrupting the status quo at all by replacing all gas-powered vehicles with electric ones. What we're doing instead is just perpetuating colonial violence that this country is built on. And especially it would be colonial violence down south in South America, where a lot of the lithium and cobalt mining takes place. And actually, 76% of mining companies worldwide are owned by Canadian corporations. So we are the worst leader in that regard.
I'm wondering, when it comes to public transit, what are some of the challenges that cities like Montreal are facing right now?
Currently, we're collaborating with different groups who are rallying around transit. And in the discussions we have, one of the main points that come up is that financing is a big issue with the transit system in Montreal. Like it's heavily underfinanced, underserviced, and things are only getting worse while the prices of fares are only getting more expensive, which is like a deterrent for like regular people who want to take more public transportation but are discouraged either by like the price or like the service. A lot of the initiative that's being done in the city and in the region is to have public transportation considered more like a right to the equivalent of like healthcare or like education. Like everyone should have access to public transportation to get around, and financing is a big part of it. And the governments are not really on board with that. So I'd say that's a big issue around transit.
Yeah, there's like overt antagonism towards public transit by the current provincial government here. And I would say that like that doesn't give our municipal government an out at all either. We see all levels of government as like differently culpable in this. Like for example, Montreal's police budget last year was like 820 million. So we know there's money could be allocated differently. And we also know that public transit is super desirable, not just anecdotally in Montreal, but like in a 2022 survey, the majority of Montrealers want shorter duration of trips and lower costs. And right now, with all the fare hikes that keep coming every year in like July, since we launched the campaign, Montrealers are paying more for a single fare than in Vancouver or Toronto, while like the median income is like 15 to 20,000 less compared to the two other major cities. So there's a lot of challenges, and it comes with like moving people in positions of power right now. The provincial government is drastically underfunding public transportation, that's for sure, and we need to organize around that as well. But like within our city, we know that like for example, there's a transit protest that we're co-leading tomorrow, and the municipal government's going to be there, and they're super happy to be there, and we're super not into them being there. But like we know that we do have to have these like uncomfortable working relationships with people in power, but it's like you're the problem too. But their messaging is all the provincial government is underfunding us. Oh, woe is me. We can't do anything about it, when like you've almost given $1 billion to the cops every year.
It might be a good thing that they're there. That way they hear the message because our message is for them. So, yeah,
Yeah, it's actually going to be really cool.
that's the point of a protest to disrupt and be uncomfortable. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. That actually is a really good lead into my next question, which is about the public transit campaign that Climate Justice Montreal launched in 2022. So, can you talk a little bit about how that campaign got started and what it's sort of achieved to date?
It was launched in the wake of fare hikes that were coming in 2022 in the summer. And at that point, it was still very much taking shape. It was taking shape at the same time that another campaign that we were running since 2020 was kind of dying. It was a just recovery for Montreal. And that was like largely around coalition building with groups dealing with like racial inequality, poverty, migrant rights, accessibility, like truly an intersectional coalition. And so they kind of merged at one point, in the sense that transit kind of became this vehicle for this intersectional look at how we could transform our city and beyond. Also, I mean, important piece of context is that like our capacity as Climate Justice Montreal was just decimated during the pandemic. So a lot of rebuilding internally took place in the last few years. So like in terms of achievements, I would say that like we're reaching a point where we can start looking back and being like, yeah, we're achieving things. Like the strength of the campaign is really in our coalition building. And I'm sure Rubens can speak more to that within Montreal and broadly around Quebec as well. But yeah, it's definitely been a campaign that we've been encouraged by how many people are into it and how people want to join and support it. And it's reaching a point where I feel like personally, like it's built enough that I do think like momentum is coming, and we are going to start making noise in more tangible ways now that like the base has been built.
Just to add a little bit on that, Christian, correct me if I'm wrong, but at the very beginning, it was mostly focused just on the free aspect of transit. And like what I was told is that at first some of the members really weren't really on board with it because just focusing on the free aspect doesn't tackle everything. And kind of like Christian mentioned before, we like to view things in an intersectional way, and that's why there's three main pillars of our campaign, being that we want it free, we want it expanded, and we want it accessible. So when those three pillars came together, that's when the members kind of had interest in it. And a large part of the campaign is that we advocate for transit, but we want to make sure that we don't overlook the needs of other communities, and we don't overlook other like social issues involved with transit. That's why coalition building is a big part of our campaign, where we try to reach out to groups that not only like in the that are like climate activists like us, but who deal with other issues such as like housing or like anti-policing or like the indigenous community as well. We try to reach out to those groups, those communities, to see how transit affects them in their daily life or in their campaign. And also it gives us an opportunity to see like the blind spots in our campaign, to see, okay, these people, they have these sorts of issues, and we should integrate that in our workshops, our discussion panels, to kind of have a more holistic approach to things. So that's a big part of the campaign. So
Yeah, thank you for adding that clarity. Yeah, that's what I meant by it was taking shape. It was still just free public transit, and then as this other campaign that was really about coalition building and about seeing like a holistic view of Montreal. Yeah, we were seeing that they could actually merge, and that it was almost easier to talk first and foremost about transit as like an entry point for people, and then talk about like what does transit actually mean for gentrification, for housing, for accessibility. So the campaign is really built on coalition building, and what we hope that looks like is, like Rubens mentioned, I don't think this campaign is particularly winnable with just climate groups. I don't think it presents. We've seen that climate groups aren't enough to move power in Canada, though there's a lot of great efforts happening and there's a lot of wins. But I do think when we start coalition building, when we start making unlikely allies, that's when we can really truly move power. And that's when the solutions are actually just. If we make transit free, or if we just expand transit, I foresee a Montreal where housing prices just keep going up, or we lose something by making it free. We've like lost something else. So it's really about like making gains for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's really important to highlight. I am curious though about what you were saying in terms of transit being like a good starting point in coalition building. I'm wondering, what about free, expanded, accessible public transit? What made that a good issue to sort of build those coalitions?
transit is part of everyone's life. Like you need to move around, get to school, get to work, get to see friends, stuff like that. So it's an issue that everyone faces. Prices or for cars is getting like so expensive, and like the insurance, gas and stuff just keeps going up, and like not everyone can like afford a car. Transportation is the prices keep going up and the services get getting cut. So it impacts everyone. And a lot of people, when you talk to them, they're really on board with like having free transit.
Yeah, it mostly has been a no-brainer for a lot of people who are just like, yeah, that sounds great. And then like they take a step into what that would actually look like if we didn't want that to just gentrify Montreal more. And but also in our coalition building, some groups that were like all in for transit were not super into fare free transit. They think that's like, oh, we're asking too much, it's not winnable. And I do think Climate Justice Montreal has been a really great presence in that space, in those spaces, because we are moving people towards this. People are seeing not only that like we deserve like to have public luxuries, but also it's strategic to be allying ourselves with accessibility groups and all these other groups.
What is the idea behind fare free public transportation? And are there any examples you would point to around the world of it being used in practice?
There's a project in Orangeville, Ontario, where the city in 2023 installed a pilot project for free transit. It lasted about 2 years, but it got extended until 2027 because it was such a big success. They said that the usage for transit like doubled. When you give people like free transit, a lot of people, more people take it.
I love these like examples of like, let's do a trial run of this. And it's just so overwhelmingly positive. And then they're like, well, we tried it. And then I'm glad that in this case it got extended. But like, I'm just thinking about UBI specifically, like all of the different trials were like, it was a huge success. Well, that's that. It's like, what?
And like clawing back the CERB and everything. But yeah, for us, I think the fare free originally and still in the campaign now, it was really a resistance to this like neoliberal means tested, like overly confusing way of doing policy. Like we don't want some scheme where like you have to be like in this income bracket or this age and like you filed your taxes last year. So like you can apply for it and like through like a lengthy bureaucratic process, which is like supposed to exclude people inherently. Or like say you're undocumented. Like why would you not be allowed to use the bus? And we also want to reimagine like what metro stations could be. Maybe if they're less concerned about like denying people access, they can be community spaces or feel more collectively owned. We actually just did a workshop last week about looking at metro spaces as, yeah, these like community hubs and what could they really be if like, we imagine differently.
My next question is about the connection between fare-free public transit and our climate goals. So why does having no fares help us reach our climate targets?
In our research, we did find places that did free public transit and ridership didn't go up very much, like not significantly. So I think it's something that we need to I think we need to do, but not necessarily in a vacuum. I do think that we need to be looking at de-incentivizing car use as well. That's what I mean by like free public transit is like a window into something, in my mind, far more radical that really does reimagine the way we live, the way we organize ourselves, the way we connect with each other.
Yeah, also like a large part of it is like having funding it. So like investing less in like the automobile sector or building less roads, doing stuff that's really for the people instead of like for the corporate investors or executives. Just shifting that mentality of it is a huge part of reaching climate goals because a lot of the climate change's response is due to like how society is run. The Earth's been around for like millions of years. Society's been around for like thousands of years, but it's only now where things are getting really, really bad. And a lot of it is due to colonialism, capitalism, mass industrialization. We are a direct part of it, so we can directly like make a change in a positive sense.
I think also like in a policy way, that's not necessarily like the scope of our campaign, but like the scope of our campaign is growing. So, God, it sounds so unpopular, but like, I don't know, taxing car use. I'm sure that wouldn't fly in an election, but like, that kind of thing. Personally, what I would love is no personal ownership of cars. Like if you're a registered business, you can have a car for deliveries or whatever, but like you yourself, like transit is so good. Our transit system is so good that like, why would you?
You're speaking my language. Kristen knows how much I hate cars and how much I would love that.
Yeah, it'd be great. They're so unhealthy for us. Like so many people die from cars, the air pollution from cars. I mean, like I feel like we don't talk about air pollution anymore. It's very like early 2000s to be worried about air pollution. I guess we're worried about like everything now.
But it is a huge concern. It does like really cut years off people's lives and kill people. And then that's not even to mention all the like pedestrian vehicle deaths as well. So one of the things that you just talked about in your last answer was fare-free public transit as sort of an entry point to more radical solutions. In the context of fare-free transit specifically, but also the sort of wider objectives that you have, can you talk about fare-free public transit as a climate justice solution and how it advances justice?
When everyone has equal and fair use of transit, it expands opportunities. It gives you a lot of opportunities to go to school if you want, go to work wherever you want. We did a few workshops and discussion panels where we had people kind of share their personal testimonies around transit. One of our own members gave us an example of how transit impacted their own life and how access to transit affected her job opportunities, where a lot of the employers preferred people who had their own personal vehicle instead of people who had public transit. And that's a form of injustice that's very unfair. because not everyone has access to their own vehicle. Not everyone can afford it. Not everyone knows how to drive. And like having an equal playing field where anyone can go basically anywhere makes things a lot more fair, a lot more equal. It's a big load like off your shoulders when you know you have access to transit. Like price isn't an issue, accessibility is not an issue. It gives you way more freedom, way more opportunity.
Yeah, I'll add that I think that fare free public transportation is a climate solution, but I think when we enhanced the scope of our campaign, it became more of a climate justice solution because it's bringing in all of these other groups and all of these other lenses, and it's a strategic move because I do think that that's how will successfully move power, but it's also how we like don't leave anyone behind and we actually don't create a problem out of like a solution that we're organizing around.
So Montreal, it's a major city, as we've talked about, has a fairly decent public transit system. But I'm wondering like whether this is something fare-free public transit is something that could work in more rural settings as well. The answer on Orangeville made me think about that too, because it isn't a large city. So do you think that it could work in rural areas? And what do you think it would need to look like to work in those spaces?
Kind of came up in the organizing we do with other groups. Just to give you some context, there's a protest going on tomorrow for transit, and it's a Quebec-wide thing. So there's a protest going around in different cities across the province. And in the initial stages of the planning, something that came up was since Montreal, like you mentioned, is a pretty urban metropolitan city, and like there's different cities, regions that don't have transit at all. So it doesn't really make sense to advocate for free transit. Like, why have something free when we don't have it at all? It's true that we can't really dictate what the needs of other people and other places are, but the sentiment is still there where in those rural places, the car is always the predominant mode of transportation. A lot of people, they don't want that anymore. That's why they're organizing with us around transit. So it's true that for more rural places, the free aspect isn't like their top priority. Their top priority is more just having transit, period. We need to put the focus on transit instead of cars. Yes, Montreal is pretty good in terms of transit, but like there's room for a lot of improvement. And like the improvements that are being made there, like with the REM is very lackluster. And it's mostly to benefit let's say investors. So in Montreal, there is work to do in terms of like the transportation system, although it is better than a lot of other places.
It's been steadily getting worse ever since, yeah, with the underfunding and the fare hikes. I studied for a year in London, and like wait times longer than 3 minutes would be like unacceptable to most people. And now we're like, if it's not high traffic time, like 8 to 10 minute waits, which probably sounds good to a lot of people, but it becomes an issue. Like if you miss the metro, that could really mean you're like late for work or late for a shift or an appointment or something. And like a million people rely on the metro every day in Montreal.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that point about sort of weights and service reductions and fare hikes, they go hand in hand because we've been seeing like some people have really called it like a death spiral, but like there's been reduced ridership across a lot of cities. And I know in the Ottawa context, it has made the service worse. It's not great here.
I feel like in Montreal, they looked at like 2020 data and we're like, oh, we should cut funding because nobody's riding it. And it's just like, yeah, of course no one's riding it. Like it was really frustrating to see that.
I'm glad you guys talked about the rural context about how like so many people are like, we would just like to have a single bus at all, never mind whether it's free or not. My grandma literally keeps talking about how she's going to buy a horse because she needs to be able to get into town and she can't drive anymore, and she lives like in a cabin in the woods, which is a whole other thing. But like old ladies be buying horses because there's no buses. Like
We had a few big snowstorms not too long ago. People with mobility issues stuck at home because like cars were completely snowed over, right? But the metro was running, which was great for people who, were able-bodied enough to get to it. But yeah, it was horrible hearing stories of people who are just like, yeah, completely stuck at home. I can't leave.
To your point, like I know that you had mentioned that being free isn't like the top priority, but the accessibility points, like they point to a strong argument for also making it free, even though that's not like the first goal.
It's an accessibility measure, absolutely. I think for us, like the free aspect is like just like getting your foot in the door. Like people are like, I'm listening. That sounds good. That would improve my life. That sounds great to me.
A lot of people, they're kind of hesitant to advocate for the free aspect of transit because when you don't have transit at all and you communicate with a politician saying, hey, I want transit, I want it free, it's just like they're not going to take you seriously. It's like you want something, you don't even want to pay for it. It's like that's one of the main issues that was brought up in the organization meetings. So a lot of people, like, they do want free transit, but they don't want to lead with that because they're scared it's going to just kill the conversation instantly.
I hate that idea of like, well, you mean you want something and it's free and you're not even gonna pay for it? I pay taxes. I'm paying for the cops right now. Why can't I have? And I'm like, I'm not paying out of pocket for that. So why can't I get on the bus for free? Like,
Yeah, we do pay for it. We do.
Yeah. How many billions of dollars for the electric vehicle battery plant? Like, that is probably going to move to the States anyway.
We just paid $8 billion to the Irvings for warships in the North Pole just recently. That was us. Tax money.
yeah, and then you've got like I don't know what Canada's situation is, but I know in Australia, at least until recently, maybe still, they have like rebates for people buying electric cars. And it's like, cool. So a guy buying an electric car who definitely like does not struggle financially already, if you can buy a $200,000 truck, then like they're also saving like $500 or something. And it's like, you take all that money that you're giving to people who don't need it and you put it towards transit, and it boggles the mind, some of these choices.
The solutions are to maintain the status quo in our neoliberal capitalistic system. That's why we're here advocating for an alternative.
But it's cool that you guys are doing a protest tomorrow, though. I love it. I hope the city listens.
I mean, they're going to be there, so I hope they do.
You guys have presented a lot of really good information, and I imagine by now listeners are very much on board. So, for listeners who want to support fare free public transit and also expanded and also accessible, can you talk a little bit about some of the actions that you've taken and what some simple steps might be for folks to get started?
Look at the research that's already out there. Like get in touch with existing campaigns. There's a fare free transit campaign in Edmonton. There's one in Ottawa. There's one in Toronto. There's us. And not like you have to live there, but like just like get in touch with them and see if they'll share their materials and then see how that applies to your context. I mean, we'd be happy to share what we have done. I mean, it's very Montreal specific, but maybe it's a good start. And then I would say start power mapping, like find out who the decision makers are and who might be blocking more funding for public transit. And then I think build coalitions beyond just environmental groups. That's what I would say. I don't think we're powerful enough to win this fight alone, just the environmentalists. And I think a win would be at the expense of whoever gets excluded in the decision making. So yeah, if your transit campaign leads to more gentrification, then like the ends don't really justify the means.
And also, one thing I want to add is that as an action after you listen to this podcast is to not be afraid to talk to your family and friends about this, expand the conversation to them. Because a lot of the times when you're more like on the left and like the mainstream media is against you, you're kind of stuck in your own head saying, am I the only one who thinks like this? When you talk to people, like either friends, family, colleagues, that say like, hey, like this isn't such a crazy idea. It's like a lot of people kind of agree with you, and you'll be surprised that there's some interest in it. So having this radical idea not be so unconventional, making it more conventional is already a big step people can take. That's definitely part of our campaign and kind of why we're here to let people know like this is doable.
Reach out to us if you're feeling like lost and you just need some simple steps. Like we've spoken to like people organizing in Toronto, and like you're not alone. We'd love to share what we have. It's not going to apply necessarily to your like specific context, but like there's a lot of overlap and you don't have to start from scratch.
I like that. Talk to your friends and family about free transit and talk to Climate Justice Montreal if you want to get started on activism. Okay, Kyla, do you want to ask your magic wand question?
Oh, sure. I haven't. This will be the only episode where we do it, but you guys have a good vibe. I have a magic wand. It's actually over I don't have it at my desk right now, but I have one. I'm going to lend it to you. You can waive it and change something overnight. What's the first thing that you would do? I mean, obviously, transit is all free in this situation. Maybe you guys want to do something on top of that's my thing. I've made transit free. What else do you want to do?
I mean, overnight, oh God, it'd be chaos, but like land back, returning all of Canada to the Indigenous nations that were here way before. It hurts my brain to think about like what that would look like in an instant overnight, but like that's what I would do.
For me, I'd say end all the billionaires.
End them.
I mean, have no more billionaires. Not like end their life, but like
they become poor overnight, right?
Yeah. Elon Musk has to get a job.
Yeah, another one I was gonna say is like abolish inheritance. Like it all goes to, I don't know. I want to say the government, but I don't trust the government to manage that money. So I don't know. What would you do?
Other than making transit free? Oh boy. Well, you guys have already done the two big ones. So UBI. I think the working system that we have, this like Puritan nonsense of like, you must work 40 hours a week and sleep the rest of the time is just bananas. And we would all be so much happier. Like, and I have no problem talking to like right-leaning friends about this. I'm like, what if you could just garden all day? And they're like, huh, that sounds pretty good. And I'm like, yeah, man, people aren't going to be idle. You're just going to do things you care about instead of working for an electric car company and making things worse. Any final thoughts from you guys? Anything we didn't ask, or anything you guys want to share with our listeners before we say goodbye?
I mean, we kind of talked about it before, but for anyone who's inspired by this podcast, a call to action is like what we mentioned before. Try to get involved, talk to people around your community, just get out there, do something. That's kind of how I got involved, where I was watching a lot of videos in my free time. And after a while, I wanted to do more than just watch videos. So I reached out to a group, found Climate Justice Montreal, and now I'm here. So yeah, it's we need more average Joe, regular people getting in the movement, because this affects everyone. This affects all of us. So do what you can, and that's all we can ask for.
Yeah, I agree. Just like I would just say, like, if you're interested in organizing, just like start, and along the way you'll find like where you fit within that and what you bring to the table and what kind of organizing you're interested in. It might be more like throwing paint on things than what Climate Justice Montreal is doing. Because we have people who join meetings and then they realize, oh, this particular thing isn't what I'm looking for, but like this is a great entry point. Thank you.
So what do you think, Kristen? Are you sold on free public transit?
Yeah, I think free public transit is a really excellent policy solution. It is one that I think is going to have some challenges just because municipalities really do struggle, as Christian and Rubens talked about, to get the funding that they need. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be pushing for it. And it has been applied successfully in some contexts. So let's do it.
And I think like if you're looking at like the cost effectiveness, I mean, this came up in the episode a bit, but like the savings on public health, like if you're looking like there's a lot of like cost savings that would come up in kind of abstract contexts that people might not think about. So it's really hard to quantify the benefits in a way that you can like make punchy and that works really well on a right-wing YouTube broadcast. But so I think like that's part of why it struggles so much. I think it's hard to quantify the benefits, but I think that there are more benefits than costs. It's not just about the dollar amount, but even so, if you like look at health figures and stuff, I don't know, I'm not an economist.
Yeah, and I think free public transit is a good example of a social program where universality is actually the best approach. This is something that we don't talk about, I don't think, as much as we should, and certainly as much as they used to in previous generations. Like old school welfare state discussions, the left was oftentimes talking about how you needed to make things free, and that can actually secure you much more durable political buy-in for the social programs that we have. This is something that Rubens and Christian talked about a little bit in the episode, that a lot of times now our social programs are designed in ways that are really difficult to navigate and exclude a lot of people. They're just complicated and they make everybody tired. They make everybody frustrated. It's not a good experience. And so what you could do with fair free public transit, you just hop on, hop off. Makes life really simple. Don't have to worry about barriers for people. Don't have to spend a bunch of police dollars trying to deal with fare evaders. Just let everybody on. It's a really good deal for everybody. But I do think that their other point about the need to make sure that this doesn't only sort of reach people in the downtown core is important, particularly because we are starting to see a suburbanization of poverty across Canada. A lot of cities, poverty used to sort of be in inner cities, and now because it's become so unaffordable to live in the downtown in places like Toronto and Vancouver, poverty is now moving to the suburbs. And so if you wanted to have fare-free public transit, their point about not fueling gentrification and about making sure that it reaches everybody in fair ways, I think is a really good one.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you brought up that point of universality because, if we make transit free just for students and seniors, great. What you've done is you've added a whole bunch of work for students and seniors to apply for their free transit passes or what have you. Like they have to fill in the documents and prove that they're studying or old.
Or low income. That's another way that we commonly target. It's also just nice. And people tend to support things that they rely on and enjoy. Once you have a universal benefit like free public transit could be, people get used to using transit. They'll use it more. They'll come to rely on it. And it'll be really hard to get rid of. And so suddenly it becomes a new durable part of the welfare state.
Lovely. Well, we are a proud member of the Harbinger Media Network, where you can find other fantastic, progressive Canadian podcasts. So check that out at harbingermedianetwork.com, and we will catch you on the next episode. Thank you so much. Bye. We are grateful to be learning and unlearning on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, as well as the ancestral unceded territory of the Anishinaabe-Algonquin Nation. We encourage listeners to visit native-land.ca to learn more about the history of their own territory and to read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action.